Subscribe to Husbandry before we begin, because this story is not about nostalgia or romantic farming myths. It is about systems that worked so well they fed families, villages, and entire civilizations for centuries without wearing the land out. Ancient farmers built soil the way modern builders pour foundations, slowly, deliberately, and with the expectation that it would outlast them. When I began applying these principles, instead of chasing quick fixes, the soil stopped acting exhausted and started behaving like a living system again. Why ancient farmers treated soil as inheritance, not a resource. For ancient societies, soil was not something you mined and replaced. It was passed down. Fields that failed were not easily abandoned, so farmers learned to improve what they had. This mindset shaped every decision they made. Instead of feeding crops directly, they invested in the soil's ability to feed crops on its own. Fertility was measured in decades, not seasons. When I shifted to this thinking, I stopped asking what would boost this year's yield, and started asking what would make the soil better next year. That change alone altered every management choice. How layering organic matter created long-term fertility. Ancient farmers rarely mixed organic matter deeply into the soil. They layered it. Crop residues, manures, leaves and ash were spread across the surface and allowed to break down gradually. This preserved soil structure while feeding microbes that carried nutrients downward naturally. So, in practice, I began leaving chopped plant residues on the beds instead of clearing them away. Compost was added as a top layer not dug in, which felt a bit counterintuitive at first. But over time, the soil darkened and loosened without any compaction, exactly as those historical systems describe. Now, why roots, not tools, did most of the work is quite interesting. Deep digging was really quite limited. Roots were actually the preferred tool for soil improvement. Cover crops, fallow vegetation, and even volunteer plants were allowed to grow specifically to break up compacted layers and feed the soil organisms. And, when these plants died, their roots decomposed right there in place, leaving channels for air and water. I planted deep-rooted greens and legumes in tired beds and cut them back before they could set seed. The following crops rooted deeper and needed less water, which really showed, I think, how biological tillage outperformed steel. Now let's consider how ancient farmers managed nutrients without exhausting them. Nutrients were cycled, not simply extracted. Animal manures were always returned to the fields, and ash from cooking fires was used to replenish minerals. Even kitchen scraps found their way back into the soil. Losses were really minimized because, everything stayed within the system. I began returning all plant waste and, safe household scraps to the garden through composting and surface mulching. Over time, nutrient deficiencies gradually disappeared, and that was achieved without the need for targeted fertilizer. There's a reason why soil disturbance was kept to a minimum. Ancient systems understood, often through careful observation, that disturbed soil lost fertility much faster. Tillage was used sparingly, and more often than not only seasonally, with long periods of rest in between. This approach allowed microbial and fungal networks to rebuild, which was absolutely essential. Reducing disturbance in my own beds led to better aggregation and, fewer crusting issues after rain. Soil life returned quickly once given stability. How fallow periods rebuilt soil faster than constant planting. Letting land rest was not laziness. It was, in fact, strategy. Fallow periods allowed natural vegetation to rebuild organic matter and microbial balance. In some systems, fallow land was lightly grazed or cut for mulch, which really accelerated recovery. I tested this by resting a bed for one season, allowing mixed plants to grow and then cutting them back as mulch. The soil recovered faster than beds kept in continuous production. Water management was always a key part of building good soil. Ancient farmers, they shaped the land to slow water down, not just let it run off. Things like terraces, raised beds and planting along the contours helped reduce erosion and allowed more moisture to soak in. In fact, healthy soil was just inseparable from good water management. By shaping the beds to actually hold water rather than just drain it away, I noticed there was much less runoff, and honestly, the soil held onto moisture much deeper. That made a real difference, supporting soil life even through those dry spells. It's quite remarkable how these systems created resilience across generations. Because fertility was built slowly and protected, soils actually improved with age. Over time, fields became easier to work, more productive and, more forgiving of both drought and flood. This is exactly why some ancient agricultural lands remain fertile even today. Modern gardeners, you can absolutely apply these principles now, bringing time-tested wisdom into your own growing spaces. Build soil by layering organic matter, minimizing disturbance, using roots as tools, cycling nutrients, and allowing rest when needed. The key is to focus on systems that improve themselves, rather than relying on inputs that need constant replacement. Subscribe to Husbandry for more deep, historically grounded lessons that honestly still hold up under modern challenges. And do share this guide with anyone who wants land that feeds people for generations, instead of wearing out in just a few seasons. Soil remembers how it is treated. And history, it shows us how to treat it well.